Hello and welcome back. So I got some of your emails, and if I didn't respond, it's not that me being rude, but I'm going to answer you on this video so that everyone benefits. So one email asked, are there only 3 assignments in this class? And in theory, yes. Only 2 take-home exercises that are considered midterms. Now, one asked, if there, when would the final date be for the final take-home exercise? And I haven't been given the final exam schedule yet, so I'm still waiting for that. If you have the final exam schedule, feel free to let me know. But in terms of communicating with the professors, they haven't told me. And having said that, I think those were the major issues. And so I will continue where we left off. So we left off on this slide, and we will be examining how history, number 4, in terms of what is history is the study of your identity. What do I mean by this? What are some of the most common questions you encounter in your life after, what's your name? A lot of times it's where you're from and what do you do? And basically where you're from is a question that is trying to get down to what are you? And how do you make money and survive? Number 1, if you're in your local context, usually respond what part of the area you are. So let's say if you're on campus, well, in the good old days, if you could be on campus, usually you say what part of San Diego County you're from. But what if you travel abroad? What is the immediate reaction? Usually refer to a nation when we say where we're from. So for most of you, you're going to say you're from the United States, right? Now, this is an interesting historical question. Why do we not, let's say if you meet somebody from Italy, that person would say Italy, but they would not say I'm from Europe. Or if you meet somebody from China, they would rarely say I am from Asia, or let's say somebody from India. And the kind of de facto setting we have when we refer to a nation we come from hasn't always been that way in human history. Most oftentimes because a good number of the nations that exist today did not exist when we began this class 500 years ago. The process of identifying with a nation is something that is modern. It's a phenomenon that occurs as a result of processes we're going to be studying in this class. The same with question number 2, what do you do? Think about this, 500 years ago, what would your ancestors say? Well, your ancestors would say, that's a really stupid question. I do what 99% of the population do. I try to get enough food to survive. I try to get enough food from the garden outside of my miserable wooden cabin so I can feed myself and my family today. The luxury, well, God, I don't know what your job prospects are. Oh, I shouldn't be laughing. No, that's more of a kind of nervous laugh. What are your prospects like during this pandemic? But before, you had relative freedom to choose a job that was not growing food to feed yourself or looking for food to feed yourself. And that's another process that we're going to be studying in this class. Remember, most people, I said 99% would be scrounging for food. That meant they were part of the lower classes. The birth of a middle class, that's a modern phenomenon. The idea that there was enough people in society that had disposable incomes to spend on leisurely activities, that's also something we'll study in this class. But also notice where you're from and what you do defines yourself in the modern era. It wasn't always that way. Like I said, if everyone was scrounging for food, your job didn't define you. You didn't really have a job in the sense that we think of it today. And what about 500 years ago? Where were your ancestors? A good number of you might call yourselves, let's say, Italian Americans. But the irony is, when your ancestors left Italy, there was no Italy. Italy was a geographical location, not a nation. Most of you, if you are Italian American, would have come from the south of Italy. 500 years ago, a good number of your ancestors might have been Irish. Or 500 years ago, a good number of your ancestors might have been part of the Aztec Empire, what is today Mexico. There was no Mexico as we know it. Your ancestors would have basically been subjects of, let's say, the Aztec Emperor, or there were some parts of Mexico that were not controlled by the Aztecs. You were just simply part of what we would today call tribes, okay, with maybe a tribal head, but no kind of notion that I belong to a nation called Mexico. How then are nations created? Well, that's something else we're going to study in this class. But try this mental exercise. Where were your ancestors 500 years ago when we began this class? And what did they survive? Okay. If any of you are Irish American, you survived a potato famine that brought you to the United States, because otherwise people don't like to live home. If any of you are of Hispanic heritage, you survived one of the greatest pandemics on earth. If you think COVID is bad, nothing was as bad as the variety of diseases that emerged when Spaniards first came into contact with Native Americans. And if you're watching this video and of Native American ancestry, you are descendant of the 10% of the population that survived those diseases. 90%, for the most part, succumbed to some kind of disease brought over by a European. History is in your biology. Your DNA chain is a history book. It records thousands of years of genetic mutations. So in the previous slide, when I said if you are of Native American ancestry and survived the diseases brought over by the Europeans, that meant you had some lucky genetic mutation, or your ancestors did, that is, that makes you alive today. Oh, how about this? You see, if you have blue eyes, your DNA chain will indicate it that you're the descendant of probably one man or woman who came from somewhere in what is today Ukraine. Blue eyes was a genetic mutation. In other words, for most of human history, people didn't have blue eyes. They either had brown eyes or green eyes, which is kind of a continuation on the spectrum of color. Blue, on the other hand, is a mutation. That would make you a mutant, so to speak. And I hate to break it to you, but if you have blue eyes and hooked up with somebody else with blue eyes, you are committing incest in theory, because yes, you are all descendant of the same ancestor with that genetic mutation. At the end of the day, we're all mutants. We're all carrying around mutations, and we all share a common ancestry. It's in our DNA. And today, we can analyze the DNA chain like never before in history, thanks to new technology. Sites like 23andMe would not have been possible in the 1980s. That technology was just being invented and it was too costly. But also remember, sites like 23andMe there's something problematic with it. It's really 23 in us. Okay? This is what those genes reveal. So, of course, why is the history of your DNA chain important? Because it also undermines these kind of categories we've created for ourselves as a result of forming nations. So what I'm going to do is show you a video. Now, the actors are not professional, so they tend to over-dramatize, But bear with their poor acting and see kind of the message you get from the following video. Okay. But in the following video, there is something very historical that's going on.
I'm proud to be English. My family have served and we've defended this country and we've been to war for this country.
I'm really patriotic about Bangladesh.
Well, I am 100% Icelandic, yeah, definitely.
This is a Kurdish wedding with my mom in the traditional Kurdish clothes.
We're just proud black, so that's it.
Yeah, I think we are probably the best country in the world, if I'm honest.
Think about other countries and other nationalities in the world. Are there any that you don't feel you get on with well or you won't like particularly?
Germany. Yeah, I'm not a fan of the Germans.
You might think they're a little bit.
Particularly India and Pakistan, probably, because of the whole, the conflict.
Because I have this side of me that hates Turkish people. Not people, but the government.
But French?
No.
We're just the best, it's just fact.
I'm more important than you. I don't know you, but in my opinion, I am strong and I am more important than a lot of people.
How would you feel about taking a journey based on your DNA?
Yeah, I feel very intrigued.
What could you possibly tell me that I don't know?
So do you know how DNA works? So you get half from mum and half from dad, so 50% from each of them, and they get 50% from their parents, and back and back and back. And all those little bits of your ancestor, they filter down to make you, you. I need you to spit in this tube for me. You spit up to the little black line.
That's a lot of spit.
Right, the story of you is in that tube. What's it gonna tell me?
It's gonna be, oh yeah, you're French, and wait, your grandparents are French, and wait.
100% Bengali.
Solid Iraqi. I'm Cuban.
You're gonna tell me that I'm English, like I've told you.
Jay, can you come down and join us?
I'm a little bit nervous, I have to say.
So you ready to find out your results? Will you read it out to us, please?
Wow, look at me.
Oh my God. Oh, wow. Shit, I didn't expect that.
All of them.
Whoa! No.
Caucasus, which was Turkish?
Yeah.
Eastern Europe, Spain, Portugal, Italy, Greece.
I'm 32% British.
What?
Great Britain, 30%. Can we 5% German?
I'm Irish.
Yeah.
So I'm a Muslim Jew.
Great Britain, 11%. You sure these results are mine?
Eastern Europe?
Iceland has definitely moved closer to Europe now.
I'm gonna go a bit far right now, but this should be compulsory. There would be no such thing as extremism in the world if people knew their heritage like that. Who would be stupid enough to think of such thing as a pure race?
In a way, we're all kind of cousins, in a broad sense. In a much more direct sense, you have a cousin in this room. Turn around and guess who it is. Waj?
Yeah. What's that?
Why don't you come down here and meet your cousin?
God, this is amazing. I did no idea. This is like, my heart's pounding right now, I swear to God. We met.
I'm Jay from everywhere, but the reason is...
I'm a real man of the world.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you.
So would you like to travel to all of these places?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so what did that video reveal to us? So let's start out with the British figure. Now, how was his sense of Britishness communicated to him? I mean, in other words, his sense of who he was, who he is. And remember I said one of the questions of this class is, how do we identify who you are? His Englishness was shared, his Englishness was communicated to him through family memories. What did he immediately say? My ancestors fought for England in the various wars. But also, how did he define himself? What made him English? By being, I am not German. And we'll see that for most of history. In the age of the creation of nations, nations were created by saying what we are, by what are we not. Okay. And here's just a very good way. How do Americans define themselves vis-a-vis Canadians? After all, both North America, both speak the same language, is often through this act of comparison. And we'll be studying this throughout the course. But nonetheless, what did we see? That even history is scientific because every single one of those results was revealing an ancestor from the past that did not live in the memory of the people in the present. Okay. So we saw that the English person kept his Englishness alive through popular historical memory. But then really far history, where you would have an ancestor that makes you a quarter this or a quarter that, that didn't live through the historical retelling process, but it lives in your DNA. It's embedded in your science. Okay. So the next part of this class then, if we say history is your identity, it's the stories you tell about who you are, what you do, it's in your scientific, biological, oh, here's an interesting, to help you understand the world we're living in today. Your DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and the di from Greek stands for 2. And the double helix, what if you only have a single strand of DNA? What do you call it? Well, you call it RNA. And what are viruses? Viruses are just basically strands of RNA that cause havoc on your body because the strands of single RNA, they're always looking for cells to replicate themselves. They can't, a piece of RNA, a virus can't replicate itself. So what you need is a living cell to replicate yourself in. And that's what the coronavirus of 2019 is. It's basically an RNA looking for new hosts to infect their cells to replicate itself. But we'll be talking about COVID quite a bit. So the next part of this class is history is something that is fought for. Okay? And again, if we go back to crack.com's series of memes, okay, really most of history has been the history of dead white men. Okay? And so when we say history is something that has to be fought for, in other words, women had to fight to have their past being told, and developed an entire field called women's history. But history is also records how differences between men and women were created, because why is history mostly the story of powerful men? Well, it says something about society. Society only deems that which is important is the legacy of important men in the past, men who had political power or economic power. Let's look at what Rage Against the Machine says. Why is history something that has to be fought for? If you look at this lyric, who controls the past now controls the future. Who controls the present now controls the past. Okay? In other words, history isn't just something in the past. If you control history, you control the learning of future generations. You mold them into what you want them to be. And it's the same with if you control the present. You could go back and change how history was written. Let's look at Mr. Schrute. What is he saying here? There's women's studies, but no men's studies. And look what he says, false. Men's studies is called history. And essentially, history has been the study of men. So what will we try to do in this class is bring women into history. Now, every single one of you, both men and women, live in your everyday through the historical process where men are dominant and women are inferior. When we talk about something called the glass ceiling, where a woman's salary will be never high as a man's, okay, that's a result of a historical outcome. But little did you know, just to give you an example of how history is in your everyday life, is that the words we use are a result of the words we use to distinguish men and women are a result of historical process. That system, which elevates men and relegates women to an inferiority position, that's a system we call patriarchy. And patriarchy is more or less just basically defined as a system of reality that relegates women in society. Okay? And patriarchy is something that's historical. It was a process that created this imbalance in society between men and women. And so what we study in this class is how did patriarchy evolve? But you live with patriarchy in your everyday life. And I'll give you an example. I'm going to show you a video. It's not historical. But it's part of a historical process. The video is a result of what I would call patriarchy.
Some of you have probably seen this video already, but I am trying very hard not to give a fuck like this man. So I show you the video anyway. Damn! Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god! Look at all these cobras! And he does not even care! It's like he's just doing his job. And he's... Oh my god! What kind of balls does this man have? He's just... Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god! This man does not give a two shit flying fuck. Two shit flying fuck is looking for this man, and this man is nowhere to be found. But I bet if you look up the dictionary for I don't give a fuck, you will see this man face there. This man does not give a fuck. It's like God created this man on a busy day and he forgot to put fear in his heart. There is no fear in this man's heart, only blood. This man has the biggest balls ever, not like human balls. I bet he has like big, gigantic, invincible dinosaur balls in his pants. They are invincible, that's why you cannot see them. You people think I don't give a fuck. This man does not even know what fuck means. If this man was on the snakes on a plane movie, the movie will finish in 5 seconds. 5 seconds. The movie will finish. Look how he is tossing the cobras aside like he does not even care. There are like 100 cobras in this pit and not a single one fact was given by this man. This man has 99 problems, but a cobra is not one. He is handling the cobras and putting them aside like they are potatoes. Like, look at this, potato number 1, potato number 2, potato number 3. Imagine this guy going on a date with a girl and the girl is like, so what do you do for living? And he's like, I toss cobras aside. How fucking awesome is that answer? This man's heart is made out of concrete. The guy has balls, man. He's not even showing any sign of fear. He even faces the cobras like there's nothing happening. Look at this. Oh shit. Oh shit. Oh my fucking god. Oh my fucking god. Did you see that? The cobras nearly fucked up his face. His face was facing the cobras like this. They nearly fucked it up. This guy is fucking insane. And look at the cobras just standing there like, don't touch me, man. Don't fuck with me, man. Don't touch my sister. Why you have to touch my uncle? Leave my cousin alone. Leave my cousin alone before I fuck you up. And this man still don't care. And how the fuck is he going to get out of that pit without like stepping on a cobra or something? I am such a complete vagina that no amount of money will ever make me do this job. Fuck that shit. I have big balls, but they are not this fucking big. No fucking way. This shit is bananas. This is some banana shit going on right there. I will never ever go near this shit. This is bananas. Some banana shit right there. Fuck this shit. But yeah, the man has big balls. I will give him that. You take your balls and go. I don't want them. Bye-bye.
Okay, what did that have to do with history? Well, let me explain. And I apologize for the foul language. There will be some videos in this class that use foul language. But look how he communicated bravery. When this person created this video, there was a metaphor for bravery that we often use, not just in the English language. Look at the following in Spanish. Look how bravery is being communicated, whether it's in Spanish or English. And this is what patriarchy asks us. How historically, what's the logic, but how did 2 balls in a testicle sack become a symbol for bravery? And that's something a historian has to ask, okay? You see, because in this particular video we could just say is a historical document. This man communicated that the snake handler had bravery by using the term balls 8 times over 3 minutes. How did he communicate cowardice? I don't have the balls like this man to handle the snakes. I am such a complete vagina. Now we have to ask ourselves this logically. How did a vagina symbolize weakness, whereas balls symbolize strength and bravery? In fact, we have a word when a man is often unwilling to undertake an activity. What is often said to him? Don't be such a mangina. You have such a mangina, right? So, I mean, if you think of this logically, it should be the other way around, and let me explain. Has a man ever gone through the pain of childbirth? It's a rhetorical question, of course not. Now, I remember when I was teaching this class in Italy, I had an Italian student named Luca. And Luca said, yes, men have gone through the pain of childbirth. And I was curious. I was like, how possibly? And he goes, yeah, prof. When somebody kicks you in the balls, okay, for a brief second, you feel the pain that a woman does in childbirth. I was like, okay, Luca, that might be true. But has anyone kicked you in the balls for 8 hours while a football comes out of your penis, right? Of course, no man will ever experience that. So in theory, shouldn't it be that bravery should be associated with the vagina? In other words, if a guy ran into a battle against all the odds, shouldn't you say, wow, look at Private Ryan, he has such a big vagina, right? But no, we don't say that, okay? We use the term testicles to communicate bravery. Now, if you look at this process, how is it historical? Well, oops, sorry. Look at this. This is an image of the first standardized alphabet ever written. It is in what is today Iraq, a geographical region we refer to as Mesopotamia. And before the alphabet was written, often you used to write symbols. You used to write down symbols to communicate what that symbol is referring to. And just use your imagination. The first time the word, not the word, but the image, the idea of women, of a woman, was ever written down. Look what the male scribes, or in other words, the men who knew how to read and write, look at what they chose as a symbol for woman. Also look at the symbol for female slave. What is a female slave but a combination of the vagina and a mountain or a piece of land? In other words, vagina property. That's what a female slave is. So this was the beginning. In other words, when we look at the words we use to describe men and women, it has a long historical process. Look at the next images. If we look at the history of slang, okay, the word tart is an insult, but it didn't begin that way. Originally, it was just a shorter way of saying sweetheart. It was a term of endearment, what you would call, in other words, in the 1800s, you wrote on your Valentine's Day card, Happy Valentine's, my tart. Okay. But from 1887, we have records. In other words, things must have been written that told us now tart is an insult. It's more or less a word for a prostitute. Okay, what about the insult hussy? Well, that's a contraction of the word housewife, and this is how they spelled housewife back then. By the 17th century, it became an insult. Again, what does history tell us? For one, look at how these words become ways of demeaning women. But even the word vagina, what does that mean? It's a Latin word. And what can we tell about the word? Well, it was developed by men. What was the original vagina? It was the place in which gladiators took their gladio, and that's where the word gladiator came from. It comes from this short Roman sword that they used in battle, as well as in the gladiator ring. The sheath in which you put your gladio, oh, that was an unfortunate hand movement, but the sheath in which you put your gladio, in Latin was called a vagina. And from that point onwards, it will refer to women's genitalia. In other words, in the Latin language, what was a vagina? A place where a man puts his gladio. Same with the word bride. Bride, it literally comes from the Old English. It's just a word for a cook. In other words, when somebody congratulated you in Old England for having a new bride, I mean, congratulations, you found yourself a cook. Okay. So that's an example of what history teaches us, is how language evolved, but always with a kind of discrepancy. And what do I mean by discrepancy? Well, look at this column. All of these words are male characteristics, are male describers, and none of them have any negative connotation. Neither did the column for females on the right, but over time, they had a negative connotation. You see, out of respect, you call a man a master, a woman a mistress, but over time, it became the term for a man that cheats on his wife, usually has a mistress. Sir, Okay, madame might still be used in polite conversation, but a madame also became the term for somebody who runs a brothel, just a female pimp. No, a female pimp, yeah. Now we use the term madame. Now think about three. Three is quite interesting. Let's take the case of George Clooney. George Clooney, who got married late relatively in life, was always called an eligible bachelor. But if a woman beyond, let's say, a certain age has failed to get married, what do we call her? Well, we call her a spinster, but then there's a lot of other terms. There's an old maid, a crazy cat lady, so on and so forth, okay? In other words, being unmarried for a man late in life is not an insult, but for a woman is. The term spinster, what was that referring to? It was just a job. It just so happened woman spun cloth from which we got our clothes from. But from some point, what was an occupation for women became an insult of women. And somebody who's at court is somebody who's at the court of King Henry VIII is a courtier. A courtesan later should be just a female member of court, but then became kind of one of the mistresses of a king or queen. That's all the history of patriarchy. But here is something then that history has to ask you to, makes you think about. Look at all these female derogatory terms. And are there any version for a man? No. Okay. In other words, to say a man is a whore, you have to say literally, you are a man whore. Okay. I remember one episode of How I Met Your Mother where, one of the characters said, I heard you're quite a man whore. And indeed he was. But look at this insult that also happened to be the name that our brilliant university chose for a mascot, the cougar. Okay? If a man goes after younger women, is there any kind of insult? No. But if a woman does it, and we'll see even over history, how women in the past, such as Catherine the Great, was also referred to in this day and age as Cougar the Great. Okay, what about this? A tramp stamp. Is there any equivalent for a man wherever so a woman gets a tattoo in a particular place, it's called a tramp stamp. No such thing for a man. For women, what is the walk of shame? I think, is there an equivalent of men? I'll let you women know a secret. I'll let you women onto a secret. There is an equivalent. It's called the walk of fame. Afterwards, when the man walks in the early morning after, he's walking confidently. The theme of Rocky is playing in the background. Every man goes, yeah, high five. Okay, in other words, no, there isn't anything. I was just joking. And look at the term MILF. MILF came, okay, you want to know history. Where did MILF come from? It was popularized in a film that came around early 2000, known as Apple Pie. American Pie, sorry. The film is known as American Pie. And the term MILF was popularized and entered mainstream. In other words, the historical document is that, no. But think about it, for the longest time, there was no, in other words, what does a MILF suggest? You have to read between the lines. In other words, despite the fact that she is a mother, I would still ILF her. I still find her ILF-worthy. Now, was there such a thing as a DILF? No, not for the longest time. Eventually, somebody invented it, okay? But for the longest time, you used the term MILF. But it was quite common. I mean, in other words, despite the fact that she's a mother, in other words, and has given birth, has children, I'll ILF her. You never said the same thing about a dad, right? Because a dad, regardless, doesn't do much work of giving childbirth, so he is, of course, just free to be a bachelor if he wants, or that dad is free to have a mistress. None of those social negative connotations apply to men. Okay. So that is our diversion into the history of gender. Sorry. Come on, you. If any of you have seen The Handmaid's Tale on Hulu, if not, I recommend it highly, or have read the book, The Handmaid's Tale is a dystopian. In other words, it's a futuristic scenario of what happened in northeast of the United States when it formed something called the Republic of Gilead. So in other words, it's futuristic. We could almost call it science fiction, but even something like Handmaid's Tale, you see history embedded in it. How so? Margaret Atwood, when she wrote The Handmaid's Tale, everything in her futuristic scenario was based on something that existed in the past. Okay, in other words, the way women were treated, the way the society was arranged, was actually based on historical precedent. And think about it. Why does she set the Republic of Gilead she sets it in New England, in the northeast of the United States, particularly Boston? Well, that was the scene of, that's where the Puritans first arrived. That's when religious mores were quite strict. And it was also the site of the Salem witch trials. And in a lot of cases, the way the handmaids are treated is very much the way witches were treated. And what were witches? Witches, for the most part, were rounded up if they were unmarried women who were considered crazy cat ladies or old maids or spinsters. In other words, had not got married. Atwood herself wrote the book in Berlin when it was divided between West and East. So when she was in West Berlin, okay, what existed across from her was the East German state, a highly, it was a police state. And if you think of the Republic of Gilead, there are monitors on every corner watching what you do. So you see a lot of history went into this future dystopian tale. And if you look at a book like this, what is it simply trying to do? It's trying to show that women do have balls, or in other words, have fought in conflict, have been warriors. Okay, now, none of us have a time machine like Stewie, as far as I know. So how do we go back in time? Well, we have a couple of ways. We go back in time through primary and secondary sources. In other words, documents. If we go back in time by digging up things from the earth, well, that informs history, but it's a separate field known as archaeology. Now, going back in time, dates are not important. Okay? I will, in this class, never ask you for a date unless you're buying me dinner. I use that joke all the time in class and nobody ever laughed, but I have to do it even if we're online. It's a ritual. It's not about dates. What are dates good for? Besides getting a free dinner. Dates are good for organizing time. That's all a date does. It helps you organize information. Memorizing dates, so never really teaches you anything. We're looking in this class at big trends, okay? And since exams are take home, anyway, you look up the date, right? What about this? What else is history towards the end? It could be a career. I made a career out of history. It could be that way for you. This is an unfortunate job poster, okay? Because what is this? This is a pyramid which you went to the top of to get sacrificed. So in other words, they didn't pick a very good image to encourage people to get history careers. And anyone interested in history would probably know this. But okay. So with Stewie's time machine, if we don't have it, how do we go back in the past? Well, we look at primary sources and secondary sources. Now, what's the difference? A primary source is like this. Okay. Here is a general from the First World War. He came from the Ottoman Empire. He would go on to establish what is the modern Republic of Turkey. In other words, in this primary source, even though it's 1927, he lived through the events of May 1919. He is basically telling you, this is what I witnessed after World War I came to an end. Okay? Basically, who is this person? He is a World War I veteran. We have an entire holiday that celebrates those veterans. It's called Veterans Day. But you see, it's a speech as he's giving it to his fellow citizens, very much something dry, what a speech a politician would give. Now look at the very same events being described in a website called Badass of the Week. And if you read the language, okay, the guy who created this article, his name is Ben Thompson, did not live through World War I. He used, in other words, this article on a website would make it a secondary source. All right. I'll give you other examples. Look at this article I wrote for the Huffington Post. It's a secondary source, okay? Because I'm talking about the same series of events, World War I in Iraq. Okay? But notice what I do in this article. I refer to my grandfather. Okay? Now, how do I know about what my grandfather did when he joined the fight against the British? Well, my father told me. Because his father, my grandfather, told him those stories. But how else can I find out more from my grandfather? I have to look for primary sources. Okay. Unfortunately, my grandfather didn't leave any. He didn't write much of his experience down. But even a passport from my grandfather is a primary source. I can see a lot from my grandfather's passport. Okay. The thing is, passports didn't always exist. They were introduced after World War I, or during World War I, I should say, to keep track of spies. In other words, from that point onwards, everyone had to have a passport to make sure if you were in the country and you were a spy, they had a way of hunting you down, as well as keeping track if you brought a disease into that country. The first pandemic, great pandemic of the 20th century occurred in 1918. And what can I tell from my grandfather's passport? Okay, he fought the British in what is today Iraq, but he wouldn't be considered, I guess, what we would call Iraqi. I guess, see, I didn't really know this. I found out that he was a citizen of Iran, or what was called back then, the Persian Empire. Now, documents like my grandfather's passports can reveal a lot about that time period or that culture. You see, in Persian, they don't, at least back then, they don't describe different races in the terms that Europeans use, such as white and black. Because when the Persians look at the world, they realize there's a lot of colors in between, particularly amongst Persians. Okay? So my grandfather's skin color, he wasn't really white. He wouldn't be what we considered black. He was wheatish, okay? And that's just the translation of the Persian term. Okay? In Arabic, you use the color of olive a lot of times, or the color of dates. Okay? So in Arabic, when you want to describe skin color, you use the color of the food items with pits in it. But think about this. Think if in English we use, let's say, the Persian terminology and said, okay, this guy's the color of wheat. That person of African descent, let's just say he's pumpernickel. And somebody from Ireland is the color of Wonder Bread. But do you see the minute you do that, what do you realize? At the end of the day, we're all pieces of bread. But when you use categories such as white and black, what are they? They're the exact opposite, okay? And the thing is, the problem is, they aren't neutral terms. When we say white, we are communicated over a lifetime the idea of purity, innocence. When we use the color black, black signifies foreboding, darkness, the unknown, evil. Okay, and what can I tell from my grandfather's passport? Well, that after he went to fight the British in Iraq, he wasn't very good at it. They threw him in jail. He escaped and came to this island here. This island is known as Zanzibar. That's where my dad was born. And in Zanzibar, what's the first language that my dad would have spoken? It would have been Swahili. And all of you know Swahili. I'll tell you how. If I ask, how are you? I ask habari, and you would reply, hakuna matatu. I have no worries, okay? You know the Swahili word for a lion? That's Simba. And you know the Swahili word for a trip? A safari, okay? A safari, in other words, when somebody gets on the plane from Zanzibar to go to Tanzania, they're on a safari. Even this is a 15-minute flight. Now, I don't have any primary sources for my dad, but I do have pictures of his neighbor. Somebody made pictures of his neighbor. In other words, primary sources, and put them online. This was my dad's neighbor. And this is my dad's neighbor growing up. And this man grew up, this little boy grew up to be Freddie Mercury, or otherwise born with the name of Farrokh Bulsara. He's a Zanzibari, just like my dad. And how did they both end up in the United Kingdom? Well, very simple. The United Kingdom eventually took over Zanzibar. And when there's a revolution in Zanzibar, where anyone who's not, now see how these categories stuck by the 1960s, who's not Black have to flee Zanzibar. Well, where do you go? You go to London, the place that colonized you, because you speak English. Freddie Mercury, with his family, escaped to London from Zanzibar. He went on to establish the band Queen, and my father played bass for him. No, I'm kidding. My dad went to London School of Tropical Hygiene and Medicine and became a doctor. Do you see how history defines me in some sense? How I learned all of this through popular historical memory? Okay, none of this applies to you guys because none of you are meeting me in a class. Don't plagiarize does apply to you. Okay. Attendance, yeah, forget about it. And yeah, I don't have to worry about this either, of your grandparents dying. And so we come to an end. And our next lecture will be on modernity. Thank you.